Max Evans had always been the fastest on the track. He was the one everyone watched, the one who raced like the wind, leaving competitors trailing in his wake. It was his natural gift. From a young age, Max had always felt like his legs were made for something more, like they were designed to fly. Nothing could stop him, not the bruises, not the falls, not even the exhaustion. Every race was a chance to prove to himself that he was meant for greatness. That's why the accident hit him harder than anything he could have ever imagined. The crash wasn't dramatic at first glance. One moment, he was speeding down the track, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. The next, his foot slipped on an uneven patch of pavement. It was enough to send him tumbling forward. He managed to break his fall with his arms, but the impact snapped something in his back. Max lay on the ground, unable to move. The sharp pain in his legs made it clear that something was terribly wrong. "Max," the coach's voice echoed, distant and frantic. "Max, stay with me, buddy. Help is coming." But Max didn't respond. He couldn't. His body had betrayed him in the most brutal way possible. The next thing he remembered was the sterile smell of the hospital. A nurse's voice, soft but urgent, echoed in the background. Max tried to move, but the sensation in his legs was nothing. He tried again, his hands trembling as he gripped the hospital sheets, but still, nothing. "Mr. Evans," the doctor's voice was calm, but heavy with something Max couldn't place. "You've suffered a spinal cord injury. We've run all the tests, and I'm afraid you'll never walk again." The words hit Max like a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, to yell, to tell them they were wrong. He was a fighter. He always had been. But the truth was undeniable. The more he tried to move his legs, the more the reality set in. His legs were useless. The pain didn't make sense anymore, and the feeling of his body being completely immobile was terrifying. He felt like he was sinking into the void. For the first time in his life, Max was faced with something he couldn't beat, something he couldn't outrun. "I'm sorry," the doctor said, "but we need to talk about what's next. Rehabilitation, therapy. There's always hope, but I need you to be realistic." Max barely heard the rest. His mind was racing. No more running, no more races, no more track. He didn't know who he was without those things. The days following the accident were a blur of doctors, physical therapists, and visitors. The world outside his hospital room moved on without him, and he had no idea how to catch up. His once vibrant world had been reduced to the sterile, cold walls of a hospital room. The track, the cheers of the crowd, the sound of his heart pounding in his chest. All of it felt like a lifetime ago. But despite the crushing news, something within Max refused to give in completely. He would never stop fighting, even if the fight was against his own body. He could feel it deep in his bones, a spark that wouldn't go out, no matter how hard he tried to extinguish it. The first few weeks were the hardest. Max could barely look at his reflection without feeling the weight of his new reality. His once lean, athletic frame now lay motionless, suspended in a hospital bed, and no matter how many times the doctors assured him there was a chance for recovery, the words didn't seem to make it past the growing wall of despair inside him. He spent his days in physical therapy, the routines feeling more like a cruel reminder of what he had lost than a means of recovery. The therapists were kind, patient, always encouraging him to push through, but Max could feel the subtle shift, the sympathy in their eyes, the way their voices softened when they spoke to him. They didn't believe in his return to the track. They didn't believe he could ever be the athlete he once was. And, truth be told, neither did Max. One day, after a particularly grueling session, Max found himself alone in the hospital room. The silence was deafening. He stared out the window, the world outside bustling with life, while he was confined to this prison of his own body. He thought about the races he had won, the championships that had defined his young career. It felt like another life, one that no longer belonged to him. His phone buzzed on the bedside table. He picked it up absently, scrolling through his messages, some from his friends, some from sponsors. His heart sank as he read one of them. "Max, we're all rooting for you, but if you can't come back to racing, it might be time to think about a different path. No shame in that. We're behind you no matter what." The message stung, but it was the comment that followed from his old teammate that set something inside him alight. "Maybe it's time to focus on something else, Max. I'll be here for you, but the track is gone." Max tossed the phone aside, the weight of the words heavy on his chest. He had heard it all before, well-meaning people telling him it was okay to give up, that the accident wasn't his fault, and that moving on was the only way forward. But deep down, Max knew something they didn't. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. He closed his eyes and drew in a deep breath. No, he thought, I'm not going to let this be the end of me. That night, Max made a decision. The next morning, when his physical therapist came in, she was met with a different Max. A Max who wasn't just going through the motions, but who looked her dead in the eye and said, I want to run again. The therapist blinked, taken aback by the intensity in his gaze. Max, you're still in the early stages of recovery. There's so much uncertainty. I don't care, he interrupted. I've been told I can't do a lot of things. I've been told I'm done. But I won't stop until I prove everyone wrong. Not for them, for me. She paused, studying him closely, and for a moment, Max thought she might try to talk him down. Instead, she nodded slowly. All right, let's take it one step at a time. But if you're serious, you have to commit fully. It's going to be grueling. It's going to take everything you've got. I'm ready. That was the moment everything changed. Max had always been a natural at the track, but this was different. This wasn't just about winning races. This was about survival, about reclaiming something he thought he'd lost forever. For the first time in weeks, Max felt the fire that once burned so brightly inside him rekindle. But now, it wasn't about the glory. It was about proving to himself that he could rise again, no matter what. In the days that followed, Max's determination became something fierce and unrelenting. His physical therapist, though initially skeptical, saw something in him that couldn't be ignored. The small steps, the tentative motions, they were beginning to add up. Max was not just passively going through the motions of recovery, he was actively pushing against the limits of his own body. Every day, he came closer to the impossible. Max's days blurred together in a cycle of intense physical therapy, hours of stretching, and the quiet hum of machines monitoring his progress. The hospital room, once a place of despair, was now a battleground. Every muscle in his body ached, every motion felt like a struggle, but Max pushed through with unwavering resolve. There was no room for weakness in this fight, not anymore. He began with the basics, small movements, trying to wiggle his toes, move his legs just an inch. The first time he managed to move his foot, even if it was just a twitch, felt like a small victory. And with that victory came another, then another. Max's determination to walk again grew stronger every day, and so did his willpower. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that he had to overcome. There were moments of crushing doubt. He often found himself staring at his reflection in the small mirror by the hospital bed, wondering if he was deluding himself. What if he couldn't do it? What if the doctors were right? On those dark days, he would remember his old coach's voice. You're not just an athlete, Max. You're a fighter. The words would echo in his mind, and he would push forward. Fighting had always been his nature. But this time, it wasn't just about the race. This was about his life. Max had a new goal now. He wasn't just working to walk again, he was working to run. It was hard at first. His legs felt like dead weight, and every attempt to stand caused excruciating pain. But with every failure, Max learned more about what his body could handle. The therapists, though skeptical at first, began to see the fire in his eyes, the same fire that had once made him one of the fastest athletes on the track. Slowly but surely, they began to adjust his rehabilitation to match his relentless pursuit of something greater. By the end of his second month in the hospital, Max had made more progress than anyone had expected. He could stand for a few moments at a time, gripping the rails with white-knuckled determination. His muscles were weak, but they were awakening. His body remembered what it was like to move, even if just for a few seconds. But it wasn't enough. Not for Max. I want to run, he said again to his therapist one morning, his voice steady, filled with purpose. She gave him a cautious smile. Max, you're doing incredible. But running... I don't care, he interrupted, this time with more conviction. I want to feel the wind on my face again. I want to prove to myself that I can do it. The therapist hesitated, then nodded. Okay, but you'll have to push yourself even harder now. We can't take shortcuts. Are you ready for that? Max's response was immediate. Always. And so, the real work began. The days of just standing and trying to move his legs became the foundation for something bigger. Max's rehab program was adjusted to push his limits. They started with treadmill exercises, making Max walk with support. He fell often, but every time, he picked himself up. There were moments when he doubted himself, but there was something deeper inside him that wouldn't let him quit. It was grueling, exhausting, and at times, soul-crushing. But for every painful step forward, Max felt a small sliver of his former self returning. He felt the fire inside him reignite, the same fire that had once burned on the track, the fire that had made him unstoppable. Weeks passed, and with every session, Max's progress grew. He began to move without the support of the rails, inching closer to a time when he would walk without assistance. And then, one day, after months of grueling effort, Max stood up on his own and took his first unassisted step. It wasn't much, just a small shuffle forward, but it was enough. It was a victory that tasted sweeter than any championship gold. "Max, you did it," his therapist exclaimed, her voice filled with awe. Max's chest swelled with pride, but he wasn't finished. Not yet. "I'm not done," he said, the fire in his eyes burning brighter than ever. "Not yet." Max's journey had only just begun. Standing was one thing, walking was another. The progress had been steady, but the goal remained far in the distance. He had taken his first step, but Max knew it wasn't enough. Not by a long shot. The Paralympics were months away, but the thought of competing again, of returning to the sport that had been everything to him, consumed his every waking moment. His days were long, filled with intense training. His therapist, now an advocate for his comeback, set up an intense regimen that pushed him to his absolute limits. His legs were still weak, shaky at times, but Max didn't let that deter him. He was used to pushing through pain. But this pain, this was different. This wasn't the muscle soreness of a race well run. This was the sharp, relentless pain of a body that had been broken and was trying to rebuild itself. Every time he stepped forward, Max felt the struggle. His legs quivered with each movement, as though they had forgotten their purpose. He had to constantly remind them that they were made to move. The frustration often threatened to break him, but with every step, he moved a little further from the person he was before the accident, and a little closer to the person he was fighting to become. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, Max collapsed into a chair, drenched in sweat. His body was sore, every muscle aching, and his legs felt like they were made of lead. He stared out the window of his small apartment, the city lights flickering in the distance. He was alone, the silence of the night, a stark contrast to the pounding in his chest. It was moments like these that the reality of the challenge hit him the hardest. "I can't do this," he whispered to himself, the words slipping out before he could stop them. The weight of his journey was too much. His body felt broken, his mind exhausted. How could he hope to compete in the Paralympics when his body was still so far from what it had once been? But then the thought hit him. This isn't about winning. It was never about winning gold or standing on the podium. It was about proving to himself and to everyone who had doubted him that he could overcome this, that the accident didn't define him, that he was still capable of greatness, even if it was in a different form than he had once imagined. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Max groaned as he forced himself to his feet, making his way to the door. When he opened it, he was met by his old coach, Coach Anderson. "Max, we need to talk," the coach said, a serious expression on his face. Max stepped aside to let him in. "What's up, Coach?" "I've been keeping track of your progress," Coach Anderson began, sitting down across from Max. "And I've got to say, I'm impressed. You've come a long way from where you were. But let's be honest, the Paralympics are only a few months away. You're still walking with a limp. You're not back to the way you were. You've got to ask yourself, is it worth it?" Max stiffened, his heart pounding. "You think I should quit?" "No, I'm not saying that," Coach Anderson replied, his tone softer now. "But I need you to think about this. The competition is fierce. These athletes are at their peak. They've been training their entire lives, and you're still recovering. You've made incredible progress, but you've got to be realistic." Max stared at him, the doubt creeping back in. "So, you're telling me to give up?" "I'm telling you to think about your future, Max," Coach Anderson said. "You've got a lot of life ahead of you. You don't have to put yourself through this just to chase an impossible dream. You've proven you're a fighter. Maybe it's time to focus on something else." Max felt his chest tighten. He knew the coach was right, on some level at least. The road ahead was filled with uncertainty, but that wasn't something Max could accept. Giving up? It wasn't in his DNA. It was never in his nature to just walk away. "No," Max said firmly, looking his coach in the eye. "I'm not giving up. I've come too far to stop now." Coach Anderson sighed, clearly torn. "You're stubborn, Max, but if you're determined to do this, you need to do it right. No half measures. You're going to have to push your body to places it's never been. And if you do, you can make it. You have a chance." Max nodded, the fire in his eyes reignited. "I'll make it. Watch me." The days that followed were a blur of sweat, pain, and sheer determination. Max pushed his body harder than he ever had before. Every movement, every stretch, every step was part of the war he was waging against his own limitations. His limbs trembled from exhaustion, but his spirit never wavered. The Paralympics were just around the corner, and Max wasn't about to back down now. As the competition drew closer, Max's training intensified. His body had transformed in ways he hadn't expected. His legs, once weak and unresponsive, were now stronger, though still far from perfect. He could walk with more stability, but running was a different beast altogether. There were days when it felt impossible, when every step felt like his legs would give out beneath him. But Max was used to battling the impossible. He wasn't going to let fear stop him, not now, not after everything he'd been through. On the morning of the Paralympic trials, Max felt a knot of tension twist in his stomach. The stadium loomed before him like a massive, impersonal giant. He could hear the distant hum of crowds, the sound of athletes warming up, and the distinct smell of rubber on the track. It was familiar, and yet it wasn't. This track was not the one he had dominated as a child. It wasn't the track where he had made history. This track was part of a new chapter, a chapter he hadn't even known he would live to write. Max limped to the starting line, his legs stiff and sore from the last few months of grueling work. His heart beat faster than it ever had before, but this time it wasn't from the excitement of competition. It was the weight of the journey, the weight of everything that had led him here. He looked down at his legs. They were still weak, but they were his. They had carried him through the darkest days of his life. They had defied the impossible. The whistle blew, snapping him back to the present. Max crouched down at the starting line, feeling the coldness of the track against his palms. He took a deep breath, focusing on the moment. The roar of the crowd faded into the background as he blocked out everything, except for the sound of his heartbeat and the feeling of his legs against the ground. "Focus," he whispered to himself. "Focus. You've got this." The gunshot sounded, and Max exploded off the line. For a moment, everything was a blur. His legs burned with each stride, his muscles screamed in protest, but Max didn't stop. He pushed himself harder than he ever had before. Every step was an act of defiance. Every movement was a reminder that he was still here, still fighting. As he rounded the final turn, he felt his body give way. His legs faltered, and for a split second, the doubt threatened to creep back in. But he couldn't afford to let it take over. Not now. Not when he was so close. Max's breath came in ragged gasps as he surged forward, the finish line in sight. He could hear the crowd, their voices rising to a crescendo, urging him on. The final stretch was upon him, and he pushed every ounce of energy into his legs. The pain, the exhaustion, nothing mattered anymore. It was just him and the track. And then, in that moment, Max crossed the finish line. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, his body shaking from the effort. His vision blurred, but he heard the roar of the crowd, the cheers, the applause. It was deafening, overwhelming. Max's chest swelled with a pride he hadn't known in months. And then, amidst the chaos of victory, the official stepped forward with a microphone. "Max Evans has done it," the announcer said, his voice shaking with excitement. "He's done the unthinkable. Not only did he walk again, but he's proven that there's nothing that can stop him. Max Evans, ladies and gentlemen, has earned his place in the Paralympic Games." Max's heart surged. His dream, the one everyone had said was impossible, was now a reality. But the real victory wasn't the medal that awaited him. It was the journey. It was the resilience, the fire, and the refusal to let life's setbacks define him. The twist, the real victory, was that Max Evans didn't just walk again. He didn't just return to the track. He proved that even when life knocks you down, even when the world tells you that you can't go on, you can still rise. You can still run. And that's exactly what he did.